This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. Each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss society, and we explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Well, after a few weeks off for NBC's Olympic coverage, it is great to be back with you this morning. Summer is quickly drawing to a close. Kids are heading back to school. Of course, the nation is turning its attention to the 2024 presidential election. In the midst of all the questions of and a big call for leadership. Leadership rings loud, but the response from many quarters of society echoes a very haunting and silent response. There's never been a greater need for leadership in our nation, in every corner of society, on every point of the compass, in every home, every community, and all over this land. Leadership is needed, and far too often it seems to be lacking. Now, someone who spent a lifetime immersed in the principles of leadership, who has coached and consulted, observed, and interviewed leaders from around the world, is our friend Scott Miller. Scott is an 8-time Wall Street Journal and Amazon bestselling author and host of the world's largest weekly leadership podcast, On Leadership with Scott Miller. Scott spent 25 years with Franklin Covey in various roles, including Chief Marketing Officer and Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership. Scott is also founding partner in the Gray Miller Agency. And Scott, welcome to the show.
Boyd, what an honor. Thank you, sir.
Clearly, leadership is at the top of many minds and many conversations today. You have spoken to, consulted with all kinds of leaders. What is the one missing element in our leadership conversation today?
Well, likely behavior that's grounded in principles. I mean, principles govern all of our lives. We hear a lot of rhetoric, we see a lot of charisma, we occasionally see the false truth, but I think great leadership is people that recognize your job is to be trusted. Now, most of us think we're trustworthy, but the fact is we don't get to determine if we're trustworthy. It's how other people view us and our behavior. Have we behaved ourselves into our reputation of being trusted by others? So I think leadership really is about understanding the values that shape our lives, the principles that govern our decisions, and aligning your policies, your strategies, your vision with those principles as closely as is humanly possible.
Yeah, trust is such a big thing. We have often said that we've stress tested this nation in a host of things, pandemics, world war, economic collapse, but we never have stress tested this country in the absence of trust, especially trust in institutions and trust in leaders. As you look at it, leadership is what leadership does. So what are some of those things that leaders do that we should be watching for as we evaluate who we want to lead?
Well, one I think is talking straight. Is not spinning and posturing. Another is being transparent, is recognizing when you've made a mistake or you've changed your mind. I think vulnerability is a leadership competency. A lot of people see that as a weakness, but it's a strength. Someone who can actually say, you know, I've listened to more people, I've seen more research, and I'm choosing to change my mind, and here is why. I hope I can influence you as well. I think oftentimes our politicians are so worried about the latest poll or the latest buzzword, but the best leaders in business and in government are those that just talk straight. They're transparent. They clarify expectations. They apologize when they get it wrong. They take responsibility for explaining, here's what I'm thinking and why, and recognize you can't always live your life in 5-second, 10-second sound bites. Sometimes you have to write, you have to read, you have to speak, you have to connect. It takes a lot of work to become a leader in a new media age.
Yeah, it is definitely a big-time challenge. In all of your books and writing and all of your interviews, you do a tremendous job of helping people get to that courageous vulnerability.
Thanks.
Sometimes we worry about our politicians or political leaders flip-flopping, but in reality, that's what we want. We want that someone who's going to be authentic, take in new information, and even admit on occasion those really hard words to say, I was wrong.
Right. You never hear this. I changed my mind, and here is why. I think we see a lot of courage, but we don't see a lot of consideration and diplomacy. To your theme today, it's about having a dialogue and a conversation, and stop making your competitor your enemy or demonizing that person. I think there's more common ground, as I've learned from you. We're more alike than we are different. And I think leaders need to not just embrace that, but actually promote that. We have more in common than we have in difference.
Yeah. Of all the people you've interviewed on your podcast, give me one that has surprised you, that maybe taught you a principle that you thought, wow, I was not expecting that.
Lots. Adam Grant is a Wharton School professor and a famous author. He said, the advice we usually give others is the advice we need ourselves. That has kind of haunted me in a good way, is to make sure that what I'm espousing as a leadership coach or an author, spent many years with the Franklin Covey Company, so I'm deeply ingrained in their principles, is making sure that what I say and what I do are as congruent as is possible. Is the advice you're giving others the advice that you're living your own life in alignment with?
Yeah, so important. And probably one of the biggest leadership challenges of all is parenting.
For sure. By degrees of magnitude, right?
Magnitude, for sure.
We both have some experience
grandparenting is awesome. All the rules go out the window. But when you look at parenting, we're going to get into this in our next segment. Why is that kind of leadership so hard?
Well, I think there's such similarities in leading people in your home and in your life. You know, we're more emotionally invested in our families, right? We see a lot of ourselves in our children. We tend to sometimes live our lives through our children. We wrote a book, my son and I, about that, and we'll talk more about that maybe later. But you care passionately about the next generation, right? You're responsible for shaping your children. As Stephen M.R. Covey, who wrote the book, The Speed of Trust, says, leaders go first. So your job as a parent is to model all the behaviors that you want to see in your children. No gossiping, truth-telling, humility, care for others, empathy, discipline. That's a high bar, is it not?
That's a very, very high bar.
And our children are watching everything we do.
Yeah.
And so parenting is, by degrees of magnitude, more challenging, I think, than leading people in organizations.
Yeah, well, we're going to stay with that conversation. When Sunday Edition continues here on KSL5 TV, we will stay with the leadership question and Scott's latest book, Parenting Mess to Launch Success. And we'll be joined by Scott's inspiring and surprising co-author. You don't want to miss this. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're staying with the question and the conversation with Scott Miller and turn our attention to his latest work, Parenting Mess to Launch Success. And we're joined by his co-author, Thatcher Miller. Thatcher Ford Miller's 14 and the oldest of the three Miller children. He's a freshman at Judge Memorial High School. He excels in debate, English, writing, and speech. He's an avid reader, and I happen to know he's also a very gifted tennis player. And Thatcher, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure.
And you know, we're looking at all kinds of challenges in our country right now. A lot of things are messy. Families are messy. Parenting is messy. And so I want to get into real quickly, Scott. I'll go to you first. Just give us a quick baseline of how did you hatch this one? Of all the things you've hatched over your career, why Parenting Mess and why this guy is your co-author?
Well, this will become obvious in a minute why he's the co-author. I've been privileged to write a series of books in the Mess to Success series, Leadership Mess, Marketing Mess, and it seemed like Parenting Mess was the next obvious one because I am in the thick of it with my wife, Stephanie, as we raise three boys, as you know, that are 10, 12, and 14. So I thought a gift I could give to all of my readers, now our readers, was to talk about how messy it is. Because when you own your mess, you make it safe for others to own theirs.
Love that.
So together we curated 30 of the things that I actually screwed up in parenting. And although we haven't launched our children yet, we're on our way. And so I'm delighted that Thatcher chose to let me hook my caboose to his engine on the new book, Parenting Mess.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. And Thatcher will always give you 2 minutes for rebuttal after anything your dad says. So as you've had the chance to dive into this, 30 different strategies, challenges, give us one of your favorite in terms of what will make a difference.
Boyd, I think my favorite challenge is challenge 4, it's their identity, not yours. A lot of parents like to live vicariously through their kids, as I've seen with my friends' parents, making them wear what they want to wear, making them do what they want to do, play what they want to play. I have a few examples. My dad would always make me wear a collared shirt, tuck it in, wear a belt, do my hair the way he wanted to do it, play tennis, and he made me wear a collared shirt while I would play tennis. So I couldn't even fully swing. It was crazy, crazy. But I think the reason a lot of parents do that, as I've seen with my friends and with my own dad and mom, is that they're trying to be good parents, but it turns into being controlling.
Yeah.
They're trying to give the kids the life that they never had. They're trying to be the parent that their parents never were.
Yeah.
And I think there's a fine line between letting your kids have the small wins so that you can have the big wins.
Oh, I love that. I think that's fantastic. One of the other things that you talk about in the book is a challenge around technology, and that's often one where teenagers especially and parents go at it head to head. How have you guys approached it in the book in terms of getting that balance with technology?
I think that we have a great balance, Boyd. On Sundays, we have a thing called Tech-Free Sundays. My dad locks our phones away, hides the TV remote, puts the video games away. Of course, if it's Wimbledon or the Olympics, he'll let us watch it, but the second it's done, it's gone. And every day, the rest of the week, we're allowed to use our phones. We're allowed to use television. And I think both my mom and my dad have created a great balance of letting us use our phones, but also letting us read our books and letting us do our homework and letting us spend quality time. And when my dad says, Thatcher, put your phone away, I put it away because I respect the fact that he's let me use it and he also lets me do other things. And I think it's a great balance in my life. Yeah,
I love that. I think our good friend Ben Sass, a former senator from Nebraska, their family does a 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, 1 week a year, I think is also an interesting component to that. Scott, I want to ask you about one of the challenges, and that's about being very intentional in your traditions.
Yes.
One that you have done that I really admire is you all go to Sunday Mass together, but describe why that's intentional and the impact of that.
Well, beyond it being a spiritual religious tradition in our family, I think holding yourself to a higher standard is very important, modeling to our children that we're here for a reason, that our life has meaning, but also for us, going to church starts on Saturday evenings. We iron our clothes, we write out our checks, we don't spend the night at neighbors' homes, we get up in the morning and we put our best on for our Creator. We're on time. As Catholics, you do not enter the church behind the priest. I mean, Catholics are a punctual group. But he actually has a great story about traditions. Do you mind if you share?
Yeah, let's jump into that.
Well, about 3 years ago, I was doing an English report where the prompt was, what are some of your family traditions? And honestly, I could not think of a single one. So I brought it to my dad, and both of us could not think of a single one. And we were sort of distraught. It was crazy. Of course, there was like the playing tennis and having breakfast and going to church, but those are more rituals, not traditions. And as we thought of that, we started to realize that we need to develop some traditions. Because my mom and dad like to buy and sell houses a lot. We move about 2 years, right? Every 2 years we move, every 3 years we move. So there's not that much stability. And after we read that prompt, we thought we needed more traditions in our life. So every Sunday evening, when it's Christmas Eve, we go to the same Mass, same time, same church. And after that, we go to our country club, which we are lucky to be members of. And we have a great dinner, and then afterwards, my dad orders a bûche de Noël, this huge cake. It's shaped like a log. It has every possible chocolate, every possible frosting, and quite frankly, it's kind of disgusting. It's a little too much, but my dad orders it every year because it's a tradition, and it's fun. And I think that when I have kids and when I take my kids to church, and then Christmas Eve Mass and afterwards, I'll probably also order a bûche de Noël because it's just a great tradition. And I think after we read that prompt, I think our life has become more stable.
I love that. Wow, that's powerful. This is great stuff. Scott and Thatcher, we're so glad to have you on Sunday Edition today. The book, Parenting Mess to Launch Success, this is a must read. Everyone should check that one out. And I love that it is simple, that it's actionable, that it has principles, it has great story, but it always leads you to actually do something about it, which is what we always try to do on this show. So thanks to both of you. Thatcher, you are off and on your way. I'm going to let you take over my seat in the years ahead. Thanks to both of you for joining us today. Great conversation, important principles. Well, we're going to explore 5 words from Lincoln's first inaugural address that I had never considered until this week. And we're going to explore how these 5 words can create space for the conversations our country desperately needs today. We're going to do that when Sunday Edition continues. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. You know, one of the things I love most about the conversation I get to have with you and with our guest each week is that I'm constantly learning, forever questioning, and constantly being surprised as I get to think again about what I think I know. Well, this week that happened as I reread a speech that I have read and quoted countless times over the years. And yet I found something that is timeless for our time. The ending of Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address is familiar to many. It concludes with the inspired lines, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passions may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature." Now, the first 5 words of Lincoln's final paragraph are rarely included in these recitations, but this week, they've forever changed the way I view every conversation and every interaction. The words, "I am loath to close." I am loath to close. Lincoln was known for his brevity at Gettysburg and countless addresses on other occasions. Why did Lincoln not want to close? He was not like a lot of politicians today who never want to close a speech because they don't want the spotlight to be turned off or to have the microphone to someone else. And it wasn't that Lincoln just wanted to hear himself speak a little longer or that he believed that the audience wanted him to continue. My friend David Blankenhorn, founder of Braver Angels, posited that just perhaps Lincoln was loath to close because he feared that when he stopped speaking that day, the conversation around the country would end. Lincoln desperately wanted to avoid the Civil War. He sincerely wanted conversations and compromise and curiosity to continue, and the path leading to unity and peace to remain open and be pursued. He wanted Northerners and Southerners to stay open to possibility. Lincoln did not want minds to close. He did not want hearts to close. Truly, Lincoln was loath to close. You see, when we close the lines of communication, close the possibilities through our contempt towards those we disagree with, close our minds and close our hearts, we close the way forward in our relationships, in our families, in communities, and in our country. The solution to any problem begins when someone stays open and says, "Let's talk." Many of the greatest moments in our nation's history began not in the marbled halls of government buildings, but in conversations around a kitchen table between those who chose not to close, but remained open. We find ourselves in the midst of a barrage of bombastic and caustic rhetoric, punctuated by personal put-downs, political zingers, and angry voices. This is no way to have a conversation, and certainly is no way to solve the challenges we face as a country. So let's talk about talking about it, staying open. It is time for us to come to America's kitchen table and engage in elevated dialogue, deeper discussion, and more meaningful conversations. We must go far beyond vitriolic social media posts. I've learned the power of kitchen table conversations a long time ago, in a setting most of the world would have missed or dismissed as nothing too great, nothing too grand. Many of you know I grew up in a family of 11 children, and was fortunate to have parents who understood the blessing and power of open dialogue. We had a simple tradition of having pancakes for dinner every Saturday night. Now, with 11 children, we had a unique kitchen table that was anchored by a large counter, similar to what you'd find in a cafe. And on Saturday evening, all of us children were expected to be at home, sitting around the counter while my dad made pancakes. And if you haven't had pancakes in a large group before, you should know they do not come in stacks. In fact, I had no idea what a stack of pancakes was for years. My sister Vicky coined the phrase that having pancakes with the Mathesons was like the early stages of labor pains. You'd get them one at a time and about 10 minutes apart. And yet, it was during that time, when we were waiting for those precious pancakes to come our way, that we engaged in open, meaningful dialogue. Now, no, we didn't quote philosophers or recite history or sing hymns, and I'm quite certain we had more than a few arguments and disagreements about whose turn it was to do the dishes or who got the last pancake. But all in all, it became a priceless time when my parents would share things that were important to them, and just as important, they would stay open and listen to what was important to us children. It was a simple thing, a little open dialogue that made a big difference. Looking back now, I can clearly see in my parents' eyes, they were loath to close. They wanted us to stay open and in conversation. Now, there's never been a greater need for such dialogue. in our homes, in our communities, in our state houses, and in our nation's capital. It's time for America to come to the kitchen table for a conversation about the principles that made our country extraordinary and the policies that will ensure our future success. When we set aside the partisan talking points, refuse to engage in literal or virtual shouting matches, and come to the kitchen table with an open attitude of let's talk about it, we can elevate issues, even difficult and divisive issues, in inspiring ways. We will stay open and not close the door to future possibilities. Now, this is not about hugging it out or having a kumbaya kind of moment, but it is about coming together and rediscovering the principles that unite our country. If as Americans we fail to find ourselves and stay open, we'll never find leaders who can guide us anywhere that truly matters. When we come together to talk about the challenges of our day, the conversation changes, and we come to understand where the real power of America rests. We'll realize that far more than who sits in the Oval Office, it's who sits at the kitchen table that matters. More than who sits behind the Resolute desk, it's who sits behind the desk at a small business or who kneels by the side of a desk of a struggling student that matters. More than who sits in the Situation Room, it's who sits in the living room that makes the difference in America. Now, as the 2024 election cycle shifts into high gear, I hope that we will not close down crucial conversations in our nation. We must not close our minds. We must not close our hearts. Instead, we should stay open. When it comes to peace and prosperity in this land, an open hand is always going to be better than a closed fist. If we stay in the conversation, we'll discover that rather than being on the verge of a civil war, we may actually find that we're on the precipice of a civil debate, an open debate that will move us forward. Like Lincoln, I am loath to close. I am loath to close. All of us must be open to recognize we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passions may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Well, that wraps it up for us on Sunday Edition today. I'm Boyd Matheson. Thanks for joining us. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.